So as you can see on the screen, in 2016, we responded to 468 noise complaints. We issued 5 citations, and the fines for those was $255 for each of the citations issued. Off to the right there, the Idaho Code 186409, we issued 4 of the 5 under that code, and 1 was actually issued under that code but was reduced down to the city code. And we had 1 of those dismissed, and 1 is still pending. I also have the 2016. So you can see we declined just a little bit from 2015. Our citations went up. And what I can tell you about the citations and when we respond to those type of calls, it's not the first time that we respond that we issue a citation. There's always an educational piece where we warn and we advise the individuals of the ordinance and of the state code before we issue a citation. So those are probably a second or a third time that we've actually responded back to that location within that same evening. So,
Chief, and that's up to the officer's discretion, dependent upon how the party accepts their invitation to talk to them.
Yeah, and as you can see, we respond to quite a few calls, and a lot of people, after the first time we show up, they break up the party or they turn down the music or whatever's going on. So we have a lot of compliance with our community, which is good. And with our community policing philosophy, we continue to try to educate. And I think what you're starting to see is some of that education's paying off, and we continue to see a decline in our noise complaints.
I can remember when this was brought up and we passed a noise ordinance in 2008 because I was on council at that time. And geez, there was a group of folks, not a big group, but there was a group of folks that were so concerned about the police department going overboard on this thing. And of course, that was just hype. It's never happened, but you can see how the complacent came down. And it was problematic the way that the old system was. And so I was glad to be a part of that when we got it changed, because it really helped. Walter has got a question.
Chief, with the 4 to 6 year turnover that we have in college students, can you elaborate any more on the reason for the decline that we see there? I mean, you're not dealing with the same people over and over and having to get into their heads over a 20-year period. You've got a few years to explain to them how it works and for them to.
Well, I think what happens over time is no different. You know, if it's whether it's in a fraternal system or in an apartment complex or whatever, you always have an older group that are there that I think that are explaining to this younger, the freshmen possibly that, hey, you know what, they show up, they're cordial. We need to shut the thing down when they get here and move on. So I think that, there's some self-education there as well that just happens naturally.
Okay.
My question has to do with, do you have it mapped?
We haven't, but we actually have a new program coming in that I think we can start mapping and showing where our problem areas possibly are, if there really are. With 468, it's pretty spread out across, the apartments and some up on campus. And, of course, A Street's got a high level of apartments and stuff. So you're going to obviously probably have, more in some of those areas, but I bet you would see it's pretty well spread out across the city.
Seems to me, Chief, with 468 calls and only 5 citations, 463 behaved pretty good.
Yeah, and that's really what we're there. We're just trying to get people to shut down the music or break up the party so there's not such a large group of people making noise. And our emphasis is to educate, not to issue citations. But sometimes when you go back a second and sometimes a third time, sometimes you have to issue a citation just to make them be compliant.
Get their attention.
Yeah. Anything additional?
I was on the council when this revised noise ordinance was revised, and Bill was right, he was there too. There was a lot of consternation about the police department overacting, overreacting. I didn't think it would happen, and it hasn't happened. I think the Moscow Police Department has done an admirable job over the years of dealing with what they had to deal with and not dealing with what they didn't have to deal with. And I live in a mixed-use neighborhood, and every now and then gets a little crazy, but for the most part, I'm able to go to sleep, and that's really all I'm looking for. So I think you guys are doing a good job.
Thank you. Additional?
I just have the last question. What do you think was the biggest change in the ordinance that made the biggest difference to help your officers educate people?
Well, I think some of it, when the ordinance changed, if I remember right, it allowed us to be able to stop and just talk to people. And so when we were going through the neighborhoods and you hear these big parties that are going to, be called in eventually, it gave our officers an opportunity to be able to stop and say, hey, you might want to start quieting this down because we're going to get a complaint when we do. We're going to be back, and then it'll just cause you more issues. So I think it gave us an educational piece to be able to just hear the noise and actually be able to go instead of having to be a called-in complaint.
After. Oh, okay.
Walter?
Thank you.
I was on the 2008 council with John and Bill, and my memory of it is that it allowed the police department to instigate a complaint on their own. Prior to that, we were working it on the phone has to ring first before we can do anything. The way it is since '08 was a police officer with his window rolling down and driving down the street and go around the block and see what he's hearing and decide whether or not he wishes to approach them at that point on his own.
And I think that was the fear that had started with that ordinance, that the police are just going to use this as their tool to be able to either, I don't even know the word you want to use, get out and bother people. But it really has given us the opportunity to be able to just get out and talk to people and educate a little bit further.
And if you look at it, the numbers are down for the citations that were once written,
Yeah.
even when we went through that different stage. So, except for 2013 spiked up a little bit. Must have had a group that was a little rowdier than.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened that year. But,
Anyway, but it's continually dropped since 2007 and 2008, so 2008. So, well, any other questions for the chief? Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, sir.